Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for taking a moment of your time to gather together this morning for us to consider an opportunity that has come to us from our friends at National Science Foundation in the federal government. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. First of all, this is an informational session and an opportunity to chat, to brainstorm, to think together. And so I'm a little less concerned about protocol, a lot more concerned that your voice is heard. And so use the chat function. Alyssa, Jeremy, Angie, and Veronica are all going to help with the chat function in terms of comments as well as questions. And the way we're going to work this today is that I'm going to take a little bit of poetic license and run this from the beginning, and you'll hear a little bit of more my voice than I usually want it to use my voice. But then we'll open it up and really start to talk about this opportunity. So I'm going to give one more second and allow people to get settled and come in, because we did know that the registrations were about between 60 and 70, and we're really close on our participation right now. So first, let me say that we have invited the community of practice to be a part of this. So we're delighted that everybody from the community of practice is actually joining, and some additional as well. The National Science Foundation, for those of you who are not well acquainted with it, and I think sometimes we forget that not everybody is as completely into the way our federal government runs in STEM as others. The National Science Foundation is our highest body in our government that does direct research in our communities throughout our country and internationally, and is responsible to our Congress for the funding. And they are a funding body. They are not a policy body. They do create opportunities for research, for less programming, but research to practice. Within the National Science Foundation are specific directorates or sections that are devoted to what we know as STEM. So there are those sections that are devoted to geology. There are some devoted to biology, to engineering. And then there's something called EHR, which is the Education Human Resources. And what that is basically is the education and the people section of the research arm of NSF. They are charged with the import of figuring out what systems, what processes, and knowledge capture is possible, and then fed to our populace so that we live better lives. And that's a really important piece in this. So what I'd like to do is to get started. They released just a week or two ago from the Division of Graduate Education, which is a really important point here. From the Division of Graduate Education, they released a Racial Equity in STEM solicitation. That is usually the title is pretty specific. And when they put in parentheses on the title, like EHR Racial Equity, you know where the officers that are working with this are situated, and who are the readers are going to be, and where the funds are going to transfer. They are also responsible for technical assistance, and that's where it all. It's the same as we've seen before many, many times for many of you, but I'm going to tell you that's where it ends, is right here. Because everything from here on that I'm going to talk about and that we're going to chat about is very different than what NSF, from my perspective, has done in past. So first of all, if you look, if you have the grant in front of you, you're going to see, and I don't have this written down here, but just to the point, that there's program staff for EHR Racial Equity in STEM education. And that program staff comes from the Division of Graduate Education, from the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Formal Settings, from the Division of Undergraduate Education, from Human Resource Development, And those are the focus. And those are the folks who are walking through and helping to make sure that the proposals that come their direction from this solicitation have real value. So I want to go over the guidelines here for a moment. And by the way, the full proposal deadline dates, the full proposal is due July 13th. And while that seems like there's a lot of time, when we go through this, you're going to see that it's in stages, and that's not a lot of time because this is a significant solicitation. So I put up here for everybody to see the synopsis, because I think in some way we have to, if we're going to talk about this grant, we have to immediately become students of it. We have to take what it's trying to do here, and we have to feel it and understand it on a level that we might not have with other kinds of things that have come from our federal government or from NSF. But remember, I said this departs. This is a little different. First of all, it says, it talks about racial injustices, and it puts on the line what their belief system is. And what they have said here is that there's a renewed concern and interest in addressing systemic racism. I had the opportunity to talk to Nigamenth Strahar, who is one of the cognizant officers on this grant. I talked to him last week. And he, in addressing this grant, kept saying this is the anti-systemic racism grant. So in the fact that he helped to write this, that gives you an idea of where their mind is, what they're trying to do. The second thing here that's really important in the synopsis, in understanding what it means to actually put out a solicitation around racial equity in STEM education, is that they are specifically talking about advancing racial equity in STEM and in workforce through research and research to practice. This is not only a research grant, but it is at least that. It is also a practice. How can we create research, understand where the research is, create a proposal that will lead to designs that actually make a difference in practice? Herein lies a huge difference in many of the grants that we see. Many of them are really research grants, and many of them are practice. Rare do we get the crossover between the two. This is specifically important. A voice, knowledge, and experiences of those who have been impacted by enduring racial inequalities caused by systemic racism. This is not a top-down. This is those populations that have been most affected ought to be those populations that are invoked in this in a proposal, so that they are most affected, and so that there's an authentic voice that comes to bear on what is being proposed as a result of the work of this proposal, or whatever proposal would come. I think that the other thing that I've got marked down here with the little red mark on it is that it should have positive outcomes. And positive outcomes are something, again, that we don't see a whole lot in this. We positive outcomes for individuals, communities engaged in recognizing people's humanity, experiences, and resilience. Again, humanity, experiences, and resilience. Proposals need to consider systemic barriers, opportunities, benefits, and how the barriers impact access in retention and success. When you start talking about systemic barriers and benefits and impacts and all of that, you're looking at something that's an infrastructure designed to build. And that's terminology that does come from the engineering directorate. I am sure that they have borrowed that in order to make this understandable. Competitive proposals will be clear and will respect to how to work advances in racial equity and address systemic racism, as the constructs may have different meanings in different settings. So that is also, I'm going to say, is a first in the acknowledgement that The language that NSF and the government is using is not the only language that matters. So that language that we use on the ground in practice in a variety of constituency areas is going to come to bear and has to be part of this and rise to the top. Often when we write NSF proposals, we say, okay, how does NSF talk about this problem? How are they setting the parameters around the lexicon? Here, NSF has done the opposite. It is saying that we as a populace in our country have done that, and that they're raising that to something that is of real importance and value. Proposals should articulate a rigorous plan to generate knowledge through research, fundamental and applied, and practice, but not limited to building theories, developing methods, this whole list here, cultivating, assessing authentic partnerships. This is something we've seen before. This looks like the elements of an NSF grant that has come out before. Those of you who have applied to includes grants, you'll see this. Those of you who've done ASILs, you'll see, and others, that this is pretty standard for them. The context, let me see, I think that's on the other one. This is really important here, though. This is a little different. Context may include, but not limited to education systems like PK-12, 2 to 4 year, graduate institutions. This is the part that's different. It says in here where the context may include, but not limited to, municipal organizations. Rarely do we see that terminology. That is an open invitation. What is a municipal organization? Does that mean that it's a nonprofit that works in tandem in STEM, that is part of the mayor's office, or is part of the county executive's office? This is an open question, and they intended this to be open from what they have said to me, because they want it defined by the field, not by the proposal itself. STEM workforces, informal, museums, and so on, which again, we have seen that quite often. In this solicitation, they are talking about a dissemination plan. So in other words, it isn't just the fact that we create a system and that we would address what the term is systemic racism, but this has to have a growth scale behind it. It has to have a dissemination plan that is not just going to be focused on those who have applied for this, but are going to be meaningful for our entire nation. And that it's going to set parameters so that communities, no matter where the communities are, will be able to make use of this in ways that they can then either grow from it or actually take it one for one. And then, of course, in the usual way, they talk about policies and things that are there. With the funding, and this is important also, and I've got it marked, funded collectively, proposals funded by this program description. What are they doing? Advancing science and understanding the points behind racial equity. And they are substantially contributing to removing the systemic barriers that impact STEM education, the workforce, scientific advancement, institutionalizing effective and inclusive environments in learning, research, and with professionals, diversifying project leadership, PIs, co-PIs, and institutions, and expand the array of epistemologies, perspectives, and experiences in STEM. I would venture to say that paragraph right there is what most of us for our life's work have thought was important to get right, and have been striving for this, whether no matter what part of STEM we have found our lives, whether it's in schools with kids, whether it's in influential positions of decision-making for education, for higher education, in the area of wraparound services, in the area of workforce, economic development, working and making decisions around HR and businesses, and so on. And what this is an acknowledgement is that we have all worked toward this, and yet systemic racism is a significant and not issue. It is a grand challenge. It is something that prevents us from getting our work to the degree that to the degree it should be, and to enabling those, the statement, STEM is for all, being authentic, real, and not just a bunch of rhetoric, which we hoped always that it wasn't. So here's the story. In order to actually think through this, and to have this solicitation have meaning to a community of practice, we asked you to come on the call today to think about this together. We want also for everybody to understand that there's a one-page concept paper that is due to NSF. NSF rarely does that for EHR and for solicitations around the kind of STEM that we predominantly all work in. The issue here is that they want to see what the field is thinking about before we launch into a full-blown proposal that would come to them, and we have not met what their expectation is. When I asked about the one-page concept paper, I was told that the people who are listed on the front, one would be assigned to the paper, would read it, and then bring in colleagues to have a discussion. And then those submitting the paper would have a discussion with NSF. And since that conversation last week, we have had a number of touches from NSF to be sure that we are taking this seriously and that we intend to submit a one-page concept paper. So let me put out there that as the backbone of the community of practice, TIES would like to coordinate, collaborate, so that a concept paper is submitted from the community of practice. If that becomes something after this conversation that you find is not what you're thinking about, and that you have other thoughts, and that we come to other decisions and other than TIES, that's fine. The thing that I want to make sure of, because this is a moment in time, and I think we're all here because we know that we don't miss this opportunity. It may not be that we get it right. It may be that the process of us coming together to address this issue, this grand challenge of our lifetime and of multiple lifetimes, helps us to do our work better and differently and sets up a different bar, then that would be absolutely just great. But in some way, to relegate this to each of you to figure out yourselves and your partners certainly can happen. That's your choice. But we want to provide another choice. And that's why we're together today. So let me stop for a moment. There are now 94 of you, which I can only say I'm enormously honored and thankful for that. What I would like to, it's a little bit of help on some of the questions coming in, and then I'd like to hear your voice rather than all of my voice. And I have stopped the share so that we can look at each other and we can at least get a little bit of a brainstorming going on this and some comments and questions. So Angie, do you want to give me some questions?
So a couple things. So sure. First of all, some people were asking in the chat whether the recording will be made available. It will be. It'll be up on the STEM Ecosystems website. You'll also get an email about that. We do have a couple of questions already coming in, but make sure you get those in there. So add those to the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. And the first, Jan, is from Reg McGregor. Reg, are you there with us?
Okay.
He maybe stepped away, so I'm going to go ahead and ask his question for him. So Reg is asking, Jan, has NSF indicated the systemic barriers to remove, or is that left up for those who apply?
I think that it's not in the solicitation per se, and the solicitation is so minor in the number of pages and in the depth. But if you go and look at NSF's Future of STEM Education, and Margaret Honey's the author of that for NSF, and we've all been talking about that collectively and individually. You've had copies of that. I think there's more guidelines in this. I think that's part of the research that has to be done in something like this.
And Selena Morgan and Etta Kralovic, sorry, Etta, have a couple of questions that are kind of related. Selena, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Go ahead and ask your question.
So I'm wondering who can apply for this grant? Is it, I know you said something about municipalities, but does that mean like as a district, we can apply for the grant? And can we collaborate with maybe some of our people in our STEM ecosystem? How does that play out?
So my best, from the parameters that they have given, which are really much wider than they ever have, they do not mention nonprofit, number one. They talk about municipal organizations.
Okay.
They talk about, and there is a grant guideline. There's a series of guidelines that NSF puts out in a separate document. What you should look is the eligibility criteria from that. LEAs often have to be mentioned to apply, but my best guess is that that's not a barrier. Ecosystems, I think that individually, depending on who the lead is and who the fiscal agent is, here's how I would look at this. I don't think that the driver for the PI is the issue in this. I think that the concept is the issue. And if you drive from the concept in either our community of practice collectively and how we see the nation and your participation, or Selena, if you do it from your ecosystem, from where you live in and your community, the real viability in this is the concept. From that concept, maybe you would then ask who best is the PI that applies. Because the PI might be a fiscal agent and not the driver of the actual work itself. There's all kinds of ways of doing that. We're part of NSF grants in which that's true regularly, where we do a fair amount of leading, but we aren't the PI on it. So because of the fiscal hurdles that you have to go through sometimes. I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Etta has a kind of related question about international partners. Etta?
Thank you for putting this on. It's really interesting. We do our work on the Arizona-Mexico border with teachers. And in the past on NSF grants, we haven't been allowed to do any cross-border work in Mexico or have partners in Mexico. Is that the case on this, or can we break that boundary?
So my best guess, first of all, I think you should raise that in an FAQ, okay? Because they're going to do webinars. But
Okay.
my understanding of NSF is if those Mexican organizations have representation in the U.S., where they do business in the U.S., then that is okay. If they are offshored institutions and organizations that do not, then they are not part of the granting. That does not mean that that means that money cannot flow to them. That does not mean that they are prevented from being part of the advising or the intellectual knowledge. But NSF will not pay for that.
And thank you for that. And what about the consulates? I mean, we have the consul general on the border here wants to partner with us on a project.
That is something that's a specific question for this, and I am not sure. You may very well get a different answer from about the consulates.
Should I put that in the one pager?
I think that you should just put that as listed in the FAQ, and we can talk about one pagers in a minute. Other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Etta. Our friend Crystal from Cleveland State has a question about funding levels. Crystal?
Hello, friends. Hey, Jan. I looked on the website. I didn't see like how much are they funding?
My understanding is that the floor is 250,000 and the ceiling is 5 million. And somebody could tell me I'm wrong, but that's what I saw.
Wow, that's a big one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So Jan, you mentioned talking about
that that's the accurate floor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, whoever that was. Jane, you mentioned talking about one pages a little bit. This might be a good opportunity to do that. Kicking off with a question that Morgan has for us. Morgan, are you there?
Yes, my question was, when you spoke with the NSF, did they indicate a time frame for when they wanted to receive those one-page proposals?
So it's not on a deadline, but they want it sooner than later. And also in a matter of a week's time, we've heard from them a couple times about the white paper already. I think that they're trying to figure out how their webinars are going to be stacked and what they're going to do in their webinars and their technical assistance for this. And they want to make it so that it is closer to the vision and the support that's needed around the white paper concepts, so that they're not off in left field and we're off in right field. That they want that to, usually my experience with them is that they want those to be much closer. And they have not put a deadline on it. So we would not want that to wait. We would want to be very careful that that we were on the front side of that, so that we weren't the 300th that they read. I don't think the 300th and the 5th are going to get the same kind of attention.
And it seems to be our experience with a lot of these things, I think, right, Jan? When the deadlines are sort of rolling, you can go later, but it is always better as long as the quality is there to get these things in earlier. So Jan, what should people be thinking about if we're going to try to accelerate that timeline, and they want to start thinking about the one-pagers right now? What should they be thinking about in order to get those ready?
One-pager is a concept paper. And what they're asking us is for our best thinking in breaking the back of systemic racism. And in fact, that was a term that was used when we were just chatting. Breaking the back of systemic racism. So, given the parameters that they've given, how do we write this white paper? What are the different pieces of this? But in our world at TIES, and the way we think about things and the way we approach it is we're always going to ask, what problem are we solving? And then we're going to say, given that, what does success look like? And what are the multiple processes that have to be in place in order to reach that? So in a concept paper, we're asking, what problems are we actually solving? And therefore, how do we have to engineer the system or create new systems, engineer new systems in order to break the back of systemic racism? So that's what the concept is. It's 40,000 plus feet high. They're not asking for the granular nature of how you're going to achieve that in the proposal itself. It is a concept paper. Those are really hard to write well, where it doesn't sound like you're coming in from Neverland. It has to have grounded value, and it also, because it has real potential. That's the thing. It has to have real potential. I hope that's helpful.
Jan, there are several questions about funding, so I'm going to sort of smoosh them together. I just dumped water all over my laptop, so if I explode, then that's why. There's people are wondering if you have any idea yet of how many grants will be offered at these amount levels, whether or not they can be 3 years or 5 years. Can they be multi-year processes? Do we know anything about those types of questions?
Our experience with this is it's 5 years, not 3. And I did not see how many were going to be awarded. If somebody saw that and I missed it, please just, say it right out loud. But I didn't see that. There's a lot of money that is in this, and they have the capability of getting more money. I know that. But whether they put it in this, I'm not sure. And again, it may very well have to do with these white papers. I think that what we're trying to do here is we're really trying to bring together partners. We want to make sure that the community of practice that we all belong to has a collective voice and also has the horsepower together to actually address this audacious issue. And Reginald, your comment is really important. What we're talking about is the way NSF is talking about it now. Whether the reality of whether we're breaking the back or we're dealing with dysfunction and coming up with another system that could be replace the existing one, all of that's the concept. All of that's where you deal with the concept. But the question is this morning is that can we work together? Do you want to partner? I from the ties perspective, from years of doing this, this to me is something that the collective voice, but also resources, value propositions, things that you've done in your life are better brought collaboratively than competitively. I worry sometimes, and this is a personal side note from me, I worry sometimes that when we have these government grants that come to us, that the competition doesn't actually do us any favors, that in some way being together and collaborating and it's going to have its competition, but maybe not all of us. Maybe all of us on a collaborative level are more powerful than we are individually to have on the competitive level. So that's part of the reason why we push this ahead for this week, and we're inviting you to partner to see if this is something of value for you.
Perfect. Now, I've got one more quick question, Jan, and then after that, I know that Veronica and Alyssa in the email mentioned that this is also an opportunity for people to share some programming that they think might fit here. And so we're going to go to Jill Malcolm with that in a second. If anybody else has a program they'd like to share, let us know in the chat. Before we go to Jill, Selena, Jan is asking if there's where she can find the grant eligibility requirements. Is that easily available somewhere?
Yeah, it is. And that's going to be, at least that's what at the moment, what they've got is it's in the grants.gov guide. So it's in the nsf.gov/publications. And that's it's the NSF grants.gov application guide, which is it's their Bible on how to apply for grants. And I still think, to be honest with you, I still think that that's an FAQ that has to come to them, because we need more clarity about that. Who can actually be the PI on this?
Hey, Jan, this is Andres Enriquez.
Sure.
What would be the difference between this and includes? How do you see this as different than includes?
Okay, so I asked that question. That was the first question. Thanks so much for doing that. That was the first question I asked. And they said it is 100% different. It is not even in the same ballpark for them. In the Includes grant, what they're doing is that they're taking processes and vision and allowing for design of that, allowing it to grow and scale and be accessible to to all of us across the country. And that growth scale of processes around STEM is in perpetuity part of the system that is retained there. And yes, it has broadening participation on this. In this, they are specifically looking for the breaking the systemic racism in STEM, specific identification of processes, of tools, of constituencies, understanding where voice from the ground is actually not 6 degrees from the voice. The voice has to be in this, not represented. It has to be identified and be part of this. And that the system that promotes this and the qualities and attributes of that are what we're after. So according to the cognizant officer who is actually leading this, he was vehement about this being different.
And I did lie to you, Jan, a second ago. I apologize, Jill. We are going to come to you and to other people who want to share in just a second. But a few more, I think, good questions have come in the meantime. Martha, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Could you go ahead and ask your question?
Well, I guess my question is, as I think about our broader ecosystem initiative, is this something, Jan, where you're seeing that TIES could be the applicant and then there'd be sub-grantees through the ecosystems if we align? Is that kind of the strategy?
So here's what we don't do. TIES will not be the prime on this.
Okay.
This is not what we do for a living. We are a fabulous number 2. We are a fabulous coordinator and mover, and we're going to help everybody to do their best. And we also do not have the answers. You do. We are going to do air traffic control. We are happy to submit the white paper with the obvious PI. We have got to find a PI in which here's something. Again, I'm going to make a personal note on this. I thought through this. We always speak at TIES about enlightened self-interest. You all know that. We talk about all of you meeting your needs, because that's the only way that you're going to collaborate and find the value in an ecosystem or a community of practice, is that you yourselves, your organizations and your communities, your ecosystems, and the cross-sector nature of them says, this is good, this is meaningful, this has value. The reality is we're all part of the problem, not all part of the solution. And I'm going to say personally, and ties, we've been doing this a long time. There is no way we're not part of the problem. And to acknowledge that and to say that that's true, it's painful. But I'm going to tell you that otherwise I can't live with myself, to be honest with you. We can't have gotten to this point and us put this amount of effort, and for me to have done in a lifetime of what I've done and not be part of the problem is ridiculous. Of course I am. So now how is that going to change? How is that going to change? And how, acknowledging that, are we collectively going to do a better job at not just meeting our enlightened self-interest anymore, but changing that? How does our enlightened self-interest shift so that when we actually are filling ourselves and our ecosystems with what we need, we're actually doing it the way it needs to happen, and the need is real, not just perceived. This is the opportunity. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for this great big moment of chest beating in our country or the community of practice or anywhere in which we said, look, we've got it, we know what we're doing. Honestly, if that were the case, then why wouldn't we all be lining up behind that? And why wouldn't that have been something that would have surfaced? And the answer is it's not clear. And so collectively we have that. So I'm humbled by this. And it's a moment when I think, especially in our country in this week and this past couple of years, where we have to be that.
Well, and I will, Jan, thank you. Kenneth commented on thanks for your candid response. So I think that was kind of what was bubbling. But I think this ecosystem approach makes sense. But am I hearing from you that maybe it's 3 or 4 ecosystem approaches with 3 or 4 different PIs? Is that what you think they're looking for?
No, I think that I actually, at the moment, and this could shift, I think that we have power by collective. I think that this is audacious and that we have to be audacious. And I think a single PI is a good idea, which means the PI has to be able to handle a complex system like the community of practice. And they have to have demonstrated that. It has to be a friend who we all have trust and respect for, who we're not going to go down the garden path together. And that in the process of creating the proposal and therefore the vision for this, that we would be collaborative on that, and it's not their way or the highway. And so who gets selected for that is really important. And remember, we have 5 co-PIs could go on that. Yeah.
And Jan, your candid response, part of that was, we have to be thinking about what we can actually do to make a difference. And I wonder if that's a good segue into hearing a little bit about some of the programs that some of our members are doing to address these issues. Jill, are you there with us?
I am. So I would like to share a professional development program that was actually funded by the Lemelson Foundation and is publicly available. My high-level concept is that every one of the ecosystems that wants to participate would be able to actually implement this PD locally using all the structure that's already created, and measure it using all the same structure for the surveys and the evaluation that has already been created. And then collectively, we can collect all of those results and end up with real shift change in the thought processes of the teachers. So we have been addressing this issue of how do you recruit underserved students into STEM, and came up with this idea well over a year ago and created this PD. After I'm finished, I'll put the link in the PD folder.
Thanks, Jill.
In the chat, so that you can actually go in and look at the actual PD. In the PD, it has everything that you need for not only doing it using the videos, the step-by-step videos, or you have a local facilitator with local panelists, or you can use our facilitator with our panelists. But what it does is the PD actually steps the teachers through the anti-bias, anti-racism thought process. So it is uncomfortable at times, but it steps people through that. So it becomes, and our measurements actually showed that there was a shift in the teachers, and an additional number of underserved students were recruited and retained into these STEM classes. So it's already made, and I get nothing from it. It's part of the Lemelson. It's available for free.
That's great, Jill. So thanks so much. It's a beautiful thing. And I think that what you want to do, I mean, we heard exactly the points, the absolute salient points that are important. Remember what they're asking us to think on if, you know, in terms of the system itself and what the system is. So thanks, Jill. That's beautiful.
So Jan, I'm actually, sorry, Veronica.
Sure,
No, either way, we're kind of popcorning, but I'm getting a few messages directly. And I think Martha McCabe too, her questions were really fantastic. And I think we want to close the loop on some of the things that we were kind of talking back and forth around who has the capacity to really be the best person around this. And I think in addition to that, I'm getting a couple of direct messages on how we might best go about this. And so is it possible for us to start talking about, you know, the identification of which ecosystems really should be collaborating and how the others can add value? Like, what does this look like logistically? We're getting a few questions in the chat around that, so I don't know if we can talk through that. And I would also just say encouraging folks who feel like they want to contribute or have capacity to help with this, I would ask for folks to add that into the chat so that we can start gathering that information. But Jan, definitely curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is this feels a little like crowdsourcing, right? This feels like a mob that's trying to line up and get some coherence. You're always going to hear from us that we're going to engineer this, that we're going to apply the process of design. We're going to be absolutely lasered about voice around what success looks like. There is no way to posit a white paper with a concept if you cannot speak to what success would look like, and therefore what the concept, you know, what the focus of the concept. There are 93 on this call right now. We cannot have 93. We have to have that moment in which we're going to do this, which questions come out, which we get narrowed and we get focused, and that we provide evidence for every assertion we make. Because by the way, this is a research to practice grant, right? So if practice is indicative and that's where you are, then you've got to find the research to practice. So Veronica, the question is that we go into actually designing the concept paper with a group of people who choose to do this collaboratively. And certainly I think at this point, even though it's more difficult, we keep the table wide and open, and who comes and who's part of this, we choose to have with us, the collective us. There is no point at which, at least at this point, which I think we winnow it down. We do know that if we apply as a community of practice, that the point of the value proposition is at all of us. If it gets narrowed to 3 ecosystems, then it becomes the 3 ecosystems. But remember their point about dissemination. And I think that's one of the critical points in here. They raised, and that's one reason why a community of practice is so important. So I hope I got that straight. I got that clear. Okay.
And a couple more kind of application specific questions that have bubbled up. The first is, do you know if they're asking for any level of match? And do you have any sense of whether being a part of other NSF work is a benefit or a drawback or neither?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you there's no match, and this is a cooperative agreement, not a contract. So those of you who understand federal government speak means that this is something that whoever the PI is goes into an agreement with, and that as the work unfolds, that it is negotiated and renegotiated to make it better and better and better. But there is no match on this.
And do you know if you can be part of multiple applications?
So you can be part of multiples, and the question is whether you can be a multiple PI on this, and that I'm not sure about. And that one could go to the FAQs because I couldn't find that. But you can always be part, if you're not a PI. And then I did ask if you're a co-PI in the includes or a PI in includes, does that preclude you from being a PI here? And it does not.
Perfect. And I have another question here from Selena Morgan. Selena, are you there with us?
Mute again. Hi. All right, I'm going to take off my video too. Hello. How
Hi
are
again.
you? So my question, which one is it? All right, this one is this about changing mindsets of adults or providing STEM opportunities for underserved?
No,
I don't know.
This is a systems question.
A systems, okay, gotcha.
We're posing, right? And the concept has to be driven in the fact that somehow we have to get to the core and to the important pieces of the system that are failing. And it is a systems level that might very well be programming along the route. I mean, it may not be just as clear as it's engineering this. And that would be in general how that concept is approached. You have to have some examples of what works and why in order to do this, but you also have to understand where the breakdown is, where the systemic racism is, what's the root cause, where are the root causes on this? You don't actually get to solving problems unless you understand the root cause.
Selena, did you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I'm just struggling a little bit because, I understand root cause and trying to figure that out. All right, let me marinate on it a little bit.
Sure, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Another not totally probably answerable question today, Jan. It's a chicken egg question that I saw in the chat. Tom, can you mention your comment, please?
Sure. So driving in this morning, I was listening to NPR, and of course, everything was follow-up on the George Floyd decision. And one of the questions that was asked was, what comes next in terms of systemic reform of policing? Is it a hearts and minds campaign, or is it policy? And that may be a false dichotomy, but I think that's an important question for us to consider in terms of moving forward with an NSF proposal. What syllable do you put the accent on?
So I love it because for me, that speaks to the supply and demand. I think that there is no way that you can't do both simultaneously, or could you? I think if you don't have those questions running at the same time, and that you're not addressing them at the same time, I think you can design the most magnificent system in the entire world, and nobody has a clue what you've done, and nobody has a clue what the meaning is to the ground. If the voices are clear, and if we do what NSF has challenged, and the voices are involved in that, then you've created demand, because what you've done is to authentically involve them. So I think it's the same thing when STEM came out way back when, and we said, no, everybody's going to think it's stem cells. And so we put out, not only do we start to talk about what's professional development in STEM and all those good supply side things, we put STEM out on PBS. We put it on the sides of the bus. We ran all kinds of things around that so that it had value. And people could start to ask themselves about their own role in it and personalize it. And I think that's, Tom, I think you've raised exactly the exact point.
So Jan, we're almost out of time. Before we go back to you for some final thoughts and next steps, I did see in the chat, Carlos had sort of a statement/challenge that I think might be useful as we're thinking about framing all of this. Carlos, can you share your challenge?
Yes, my name is Carlos Cozart. What I mentioned as a general statement, and hopefully, again, it's also a personal challenge. I am that former high school nerd who became a professional engineer, former math professor and very active in STEM ecosystems. However, my only offering to go to college, and I now have 3 college degrees, was on a track scholarship. So to me, a passion in STEM, math, and engineering was, for whatever reason, was not obvious, opposed to, quote, my athletic abilities. And I mean, I think that's a mindset that those that are advocating for increasing the amount of minorities within the STEM arena has to change that mindset. Success has not to be defined as only sports and entertainment, but STEM likewise is a pathway for success. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carlos. So I know, Jan, that we've been back channeling a tiny bit while you've been talking. And I know Alyssa and Veronica are planning to pretty quickly here send out a survey, which will have a number of things. It'll be your opportunity to mention that you have interest in participating, whether or not you have interest in leading, whether or not you have programs that might be worth considering as models. So expect to see that in short order. And please, please, please make sure to complete that and get it back in short order. As Jan mentioned, while there's not a strict timeline, the sooner that we can put together a quality product, the better. Jan, do you have any closing thoughts or next steps that people should be considering?
I think that I will say again that the PI on this grant will matter to a very large degree. This has to be an organization that can interface with NSF and become a partner, not a receiver of things from NSF, but in real partnership with them, because this thing reads like a partnership. And again, includes does not. Includes is different. And I think that's really critical. The other thing is that we would love to have either volunteers around the PI or suggestions. And maybe we put it in that survey, or if you want to email me or Alyssa, Veronica, or Jeremy, whoever. But I think there's and I think a pedigree in this is important as well. Having experience with NSF so that it's not your first go round, because this is a hefty, this has got a lot to it. And my best guess is, even though there is a specified amount of money and time in this grant, that the grantees will not be, that this could be perpetuated. If it's going the way it needs to go, it's probably a decadal opportunity in the long haul, because that's what it's going to take. So I hope that you have that. The other thing is, I have to say that your enthusiasm, your understanding of the opportunity, but also of the grandest challenge that we have all been talking about for this, throughout our careers and generation, multiple generations. Maybe what we've done is draw a line in the sand with NSF, and that we can hold hands, and that we can actually be real about what's working and why, and where the gaps are, and how we design and engineer the future. And it's not just in rhetoric, it's in actual action that's defensible with evidence, and can grow to every kid, to every community, to every family. So thanks again.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jan. I think my takeaways from this, and tell me if I missed anything, are: number one, this is not going to be a light lift. So be aware of that. And number two, that it's going to have to be timely. But on the flip side, the critical work, it's work that we've been talking about in the ecosystems for years, but heavily for the past year. And it's work that I think, because of our locations around the country, we're really in a great position to do well. This has STEM ecosystems written all over it. So I know I'm really excited to see these things. Again, please make sure that you're watching for your email over the next several days to look for that survey from Alyssa and Veronica, and get that completed. In the meantime, start talking to your people. Think about who you have. Do you have the capacity to lead? Do you have programs that should be used as models? Do you have ideas, needs, and populations that should be and could be served by a grant of this type? So thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. And we really, really look forward to working with all of you as we move forward.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, everybody.